In this video I will show you that the 911 996s are at the bottom of the depreciation curve, what this means for the different model types, and whether or not the manuals are going for a premium in today's market. What's up YouTube, and welcome to a new video. So we already analyzed the 991 market, the 997 market, and that means that today it's time to go back even further in time and to have a look to the 996 market. Now I think it goes without saying that since the introduction of the 996s, they came down a lot in price, and that they are right now forming a bottom in the 911 market. So arguably, a 996 gives you the best value for money 911 what you can buy right now. There are, however, some key differences between the model types. Now before we dive into those details, let me first explain how we are going to analyze this market. We are namely going to take a top-down approach, and that means that we will first have a look to the full 911 market. This namely gives us a clear idea as to how the 996 relates to the 997 and the 991. In the second step we will dive then into the 996 market and consider the different model types. In this step we will also have a look into the depreciation per year and the depreciation per 1000 miles driven. Finally, in step number 3 then, we will figure out where the 996 ranks on the depreciation leaderboard. So let's start now with step number 1, and that was the larger 911 market. The full 911 market is appearing now right over here, where you can see that we've model year on the horizontal axis and the price on the vertical axis. You can also see that each car in the market is indicated by a bubble, and that the blue solid line going through the graph shows the depreciation curve. Prices are, by the way, displayed in US dollar because we're looking to the US market. Now if I put this graph on the big screen, then you can see that we have almost a complete depreciation curve of the modern 911 market over here. The model years namely range from 1999 till 2019, and that means that only the 992 generation is excluded. It is then also important to point out that only the Carrera 2, the Carrera 4 and the S versions for each of those are included. It are then also of course those models that we will focus on in this analysis. Now if we look to this depreciation curve and the average price points, which are indicated by the black axis, then I think it's fair to conclude that the 911 market is very stable. There are only some minor price jumps between the different generations, but nothing out of the ordinary. And speaking about those generations, we know that this graph includes many generations. So let's identify those with a different color. You can see now that we have the 991 in blue, the 997 in green and the 996 in orange. And we can see a very clear distinction in their depreciation rates. The average rate for a 991 is namely $8,134 per year, while it's $3,834 for the 997. For the 996 it is of course the lowest, and an average rate of $1,903 per year. Now if you are more interested in the 997 market or the 991 market, then I recommend that you check out my full depreciation analysis on those markets. The links for that will be appearing right over here, and I will also make sure to put them down below in the description of the video. We will now namely start to zoom in to the 996s. And by doing this, you can see that we end up with the same graph as before, but split by model type. We have in blue now the Carrera 2, in green the Carrera 4, and in orange we have the Carrera 4S. Before we have a look to the depreciation rates, let's consider some general numbers. We can see that there are 225 cars for sale and that around 87% of the market is made up out of the normal Carrera 2s. Furthermore, we can also see that if you want a 996, you don't need to break the bank. At least to purchase one. The most occurring price for one is namely $23,500. You can see though that there are some large differences within the market. The 4S for example will go for a large premium and will cost you an average $12,000 more than a standard version. Compared to the other two, it is then of course also a different car. And I'm not 100% sure about the historical price development in the US, but in Europe at least, this 4S has been going up slightly in value. I am quite sure though that the premium of a 4S is a lot higher in Europe than it is in the US. And after those general numbers, it's time to have a look to the depreciation rates. Before we do that however, please make sure that you support the channel by smashing that like button. Also don't forget then to comment down below which car you would like to see analyzed next. Once enough people request a certain car, I will make a video about it. Now then, let's have a look to the depreciation numbers. By looking to the slopes of the depreciation curves, we can already see that the depreciation per year is the highest for the Carrera 2. This model type is namely losing on average $1,600 per year. For the Carrera 4 this is $740, and for the Carrera 4S this is $640. Now I need to elaborate a little bit on these numbers. We namely need to interpret them with some care. But more about that in a bit. The market is now namely split by model type, but there's another important factor which can influence the values of these cars. And that is of course the transmission type. For cars with this age, it's often so that the manuals go for a premium compared to the automatic ones. And that is of course because those auto boxes were not really good back then. It is then also so that in the newer models, such as the 991, this market split is not so evident. But we are now here to focus on the 996 market, so let's do that. If you look to this graph, then you can see that we can only split this market further for the Carrera 2. For the other model types, there are simply not enough cars on the market. So let's take out the Carrera 2 from the graph and split that market by transmission type. That is what is appearing now on your screen, and you can see that indeed the manuals go for a premium compared to the automatic cars. To be more precise, they go for a premium of around $4,000. This number is however a little bit deceiving. And by the way, so are actually the earlier numbers which I showed you. You see, the problem is that the 996s are at the bottom of the 911's depreciation curve. That we could see clearly from the large depreciation curve which I showed you earlier in the video. It is then of course also no surprise that when we zoomed in to the 996 market, we saw very flat depreciation lines. In some cases it is even so that for the 996.1 generations, there's absolutely no difference in the average price points between the different model years. Now if we pause a second over there and think what that actually means, then we could of course come to the conclusion that model year is not very important for the price of a 996 and that there are other factors which are explaining the price variation what we see in the market. And by now you probably guessed what we're missing over here. The mileage. It is for example so that the manuals are not only $4,000 more expensive than the automatic cars just because they have a manual transmission. It is namely the mileage over here which is playing a role just as important as the transmission in the setting of a 996 price. And this kind of market behavior, where the importance of model year for the price is decreasing and the importance of mileage for the price is increasing, is not uncommon. In fact, it goes for almost all car markets. You could even estimate how the price could be explained by the model year, the mileage, and for example the transmission type, and how the importance of these aspects changes over time. This analysis I will however save for a separate video as it applies to many more cars than just the 996. So let's go back to the 996 market and take now also the mileage into account with the depreciation per 1,000 miles driven. It is then also that what is appearing right over here. And you can see it instead of model year, we have now the mileage on the horizontal axis. Now if you look to this graph, then you can see first that the curve for the Carrera 4 looks a little bit strange. And that's because we have too little observations in that market. If you're searching for that car, then I would also recommend to look to the Carrera 2 market when it comes to market statistics. Now just as with the model year versus price graph, we can see that the 4S goes for a premium to the rest of the market. In terms of depreciation, the numbers are however the same. Both the Carrera 2 and the 4S namely lose on average $130 per 1,000 miles driven. And I probably don't need to explain to you that this is an extremely small number. But what about the premium of the manual cars? We talked about that earlier. After all, we said then that we need to take the mileage into account in order to say something sensible about this premium. So let's split the Carrera 2 market again by transmission type. First off, we can see that in terms of depreciation, there's not really a difference between the automatic and the manual cars. There are however two interesting differences which I would like to show you. First, have a look at the cars below 35,000 miles. They are all manual cars. And for a car with this age, that mileage is of course extremely low. So owners are either using the manual cars less because it's perhaps more difficult to drive, or, and this is perhaps the most likely explanation, the manuals are now tucked away in the collector's garages. Now let's have a look to the second thing which I wanted to show you. If we namely compare the automatic and the manual cars for the mileage range where we have a decent amount of observations, so let's say between 50 and 100,000 miles, then we can see that a manual car which has the same mileage as an automatic car indeed tends to go for a premium over an automatic car. Nevertheless, if we only look to the manual cars, for example at a range of 75,000 miles, then we can see that there's still a very large price variation. And that of course means that there's still something in the market which we are not considering, but which is explaining this price variation. We can then also still drill down one more level to get a more detailed picture of the market. And if you watch this video all the way till here, then you probably know what we're going to do now, because you're most likely aware of the differences between the 996.1 and the 996.2 cars. Among those differences are for example the new headlamps, which have the same style as the ones on the turbo. And this is of course personal, but only for those I would already go for the 996.2. I am however not the only person who has this preference, And I do think then also that in general, the 996.2 is preferred to the 996.1. That is at least what I can see in the numbers, so let's have a look. The market is now split by generation and by transmission type. And here we can see that the 996.2, both the manual and automatics, so the blue and the green line, go for a premium to the 996.1 models. However, if we look to the 996.1 and the 996.2 market, then we can see that within each of them, the manuals go for a premium over the automatic cars. So our initial observation that the manuals are more expensive than the automatic cars still holds. However, you can see that it doesn't apply to the full market, but that it applies to the 996.1 market separately and to the 996.2 market separately. Now if we repeat the same exercise and look to the manual cars for a given mileage of let's say around 75,000 miles, then we can see that there's still a large price variation in each sub-market. And that is due to factors which are very hard to capture in the data. The cars at the top over here are, for example, the ones which have a documented history and are in prime condition. Vice versa, this of course also means that the cars at the bottom are in worse shape. And this kind of market split you often see in car markets which are bottomed out. For those, the model year is no longer relevant and the mileage plus the condition and documentation of the car become key for the price. And hence, they can cause a lot of price variation. Now then, before we close this video, which I guess is already becoming quite lengthy, I still want to show you one more thing. And that is how the 996 compares to the other cars which I've analyzed on this channel. Now to do this, I will use the depreciation leaderboard. And this depreciation leaderboard is based on the relative depreciation rates. And because we saw that the model year is not really relevant anymore for the 996 market, let's have a look to the depreciation per 1000 miles leaderboard. That is appearing now on your screen, and you can see it with the cars on the horizontal axis and the relative depreciation on the vertical axis. If we find then the 996, then we can see that it scores the best out of all of the cars which I've analyzed. It namely depreciates at an average rate of 0.4% per 1000 miles. It is then also not surprising to see that it ranks very close to the 997 Cayman, a car which is also very close to bottoming out. Perhaps it's also not so strange that the 996 scores so good. After all, the oldest cars are around 21 years old now. And this makes it one of the oldest cars on the leaderboard. The only other car with the same age is the Ferrari 360. This car is though slightly more sensitive to the mileage than a 996, as it has a rate of 0.7% per 1000 miles driven. And on that note, let's wrap up this video and conclude. It is fair to say that the 996 market is very close to bottoming, or perhaps already bottomed out. We saw then also that it is difficult to speak of one 996 market, as aspects such as the mileage, transmission and generations are factors which have a large influence on the price. And it are the manual 996.2 which are in mint condition, which you will find at the top of the price range. Higher mileage 996.1, which are also automatic and in a bad condition, you're most likely to find at the bottom end of the price range. It is even so that you can find already one for around $14,000. When you are in the market for a 996, you do then also need to remember that you're buying a car which is 21 years old and has a maintenance which belongs to a car which is 21 years old. And these maintenance costs and also other common 996 problems are not addressed in this video. Another important aspect to take into account is that this analysis is based on a snapshot of the market, and that buying a 996 right now doesn't mean that it will go up in value. I do however think though that any loss coming from the depreciation will be extremely low for the 996. To figure out how the market is moving, we simply need data from different timestamps. In about half a year or so, I will then also make a market update video about the 996 market. That will give us a pretty good idea as to where the prices are going, if they are going anywhere at all. And with that we arrived at the end of the video. Now if you enjoyed this video, please remember to support the channel by smashing that like button. I also recommend to browse through my channel, as you will find depreciation analysis over there for various cars. As always, a huge thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week for a new depreciation analysis.